It's certainly a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to welcome all of these lifelong learners to this educational webinar. After all, we are all lifelong learners, and we should remember that we are the ones who are those lifelong learners, not those who are advocating for more and more maintenance and certification and all of the rest of that. This webinar is sponsored by AAPS and is on the maintenance of licensure, maintenance certification. And we are primarily wanting to make this an informative, educational webinar, listing both the pros and the cons of this entire arena, which has sprung up in the last 2 or maybe 3 decades. The difference between maintenance of licensure and maintenance certification is really quite significant, and I think most of you probably are aware of the difference, but I think it might be a good idea to go over quickly. Maintenance of licensure still has not taken effect as far as I know in any particular state, but this is the design for it to be instituted by one of the state medical boards. In other words, instead of just relying on continuing medical education credits to be able to relicense a physician, there's going to be something added to it. And this is something that we still have to be vigilant about, but we can thank AAPS for helping to at least temporarily stop this process. Maintenance certification is something completely different, however, and it's sponsored by the American Board of Medical Specialties, the ABMS, and it's 24 different specialty medical board components. And so there are 2 different entities here, but we want to cover all of these because they are connected. I want to especially thank Dr. Jane Orient, the Executive Director of AAPS, and Mr. Andrew Schlafly, the Legal Counsel, and Dr. Larry Huntoon, the editor of the Journal of the AAPS. And I really want to especially thank Jeremy Snavely. Mr. Snavely has really done so much to make this webinar possible. AAPS is really the only physician medical organization seriously helping to help physicians navigate these treacherous waters of these increasing requirements of medical licensure. And these are treacherous waters, and we're trying to do what we can to help physicians in navigating these costly and time-consuming requirements that are springing up around us all over the place. I want to make it clear that we are not against specialty medical board certification. I feel that it is really not proper for physicians to go through medical school and residency and then not have some kind of an examination at the end. So I want to make it clear that we are not against specialty medical certification, but what we are against and what we do feel strongly about is that the relicensure activities have gotten out of hand. We also feel that these kinds of certifications are really not to be used to drive physicians out of practice or to in any way discriminate against physicians. These are good to have. They're important for our careers, and I think we should strive for them, but they should not be used as a weapon to drive physicians out of practice or in any way discriminate against them. Some of the things that AAPS is doing in order to help physicians in these regards is we have instituted a lawsuit against the ABMS, the American Board of Medical Specialties, and Mr. Schlafly just had a telephone conference that I think many of you may have been involved in, describing and detailing some of the aspects of that litigation. So we won't really dwell too much on that here. AAPS is involved in model legislation to help not only prevent the maintenance of licensure from taking hold, but also to limit maintenance certification and what the different states and entities within the state can do. And what we're trying to do with this model legislation is to get a number of states to introduce it in their state legislative sessions. And we need doctors to help introduce this. And this is model legislation that I think every doctor in every state in the country should contact their state legislators and get this model legislation introduced so that we can accomplish what we need to via this method as well. Another thing that AAPS has done in its journal is to publish various articles on this entire issue. The current issue, the very most recent issue of the Journal of AAPS, has an article that is written from the patient's perspective. Now, a lot of patients, a lot of the public, a lot of the news media and legislators even have a maybe a lack of concern towards some of these issues that have to do with unnecessary testing and certification and so forth, because they really don't understand. And they've been kept in the dark on what all of this testing is all about. And I think they need to understand that what's at stake here is not just an extra costly examination for a doctor to go through. It's not just a matter of preparing and wasting time and spending time doing these things, but it actually has very, very negative connotations to their care. And so this article, which I won't discuss too much right now, but you can look it up, in the very most recent issue of the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. And what I plan to do, it's an article that I wrote, but I want to make copies of it and pass it out to my patients, because I want my patients to be educated on this subject. I want them to know that it's not just me, it's their care that's at stake, and their care is at stake because of certain ways in which this whole licensure and relicensure has been taking shape, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. One other item that I want to bring to your attention is a Medscape presentation from a Dr. John L. Marshall, and it's entitled "A Frisking, Then a Mugging," and it just appeared in the last day or two. And what I think is so exciting and so interesting about this is that Dr. Marshall actually has in the past written questions for the boards, but as a test taker, he's not too enthused about the whole process. And what he has to say about it is most intriguing in this 3 or 4 minute presentation. So I would invite all of you to take a look at it later when you have time. Now, my name again is Dr. Kenneth Christman. I am a plastic surgeon practicing in Dayton, Ohio. I was board certified by the American Board of Plastic Surgery in 1982, and I'm not current on any MOC at all, and never will be, and neither should you. I want to introduce our presenter this afternoon, who is Dr. Paul Kempen. And Dr. Kempen is an MD, PhD, and he is the type that you would expect to be an academic, and he actually is an academic. He's been in various very, very prestigious institutions across the United States, and he's the kind of guy that you would think might be writing the questions for the boards and might be on the other side. And I, for one, am very glad that he's not on the other side doing all of those things and making a lot of money by instituting MOC requirements on the rest of us, because he is a strong fighter. And I will tell you that he is largely responsible for stopping MOL in Ohio. And I'm really very grateful for him, and it's very, very refreshing to see someone like him who has come to the forefront and who has recognized these processes for what they are. And he's going to present now this whole scenario of what's developing in this MOC, MOL arena. And so I'll turn the time over now to him.
Thank you, Dr. Christman. I hope I'm being heard at this point. My name is Paul Kempen, and if you look at the slide here, you'll see that on the left there is a signature from my university. I went to medical school in Germany. The school was founded in 1457. There's a lot of history there. It goes back a long time, and I found excellent education opportunities in Europe, and I found that medicine in Europe is in no way inferior to the United States. The one thing I did find is there is no MOC, MOL, and I want to talk about OCC as the MOC of the osteopaths. These have all been modalities that have arisen mainly under the pressures of the American Board of Internal Medicine, who has pushed for this stuff, and they have now pushed as far as to make MOC as a continuous phenomenon. When I first signed up, it was a lifelong phenomenon back in '87, and now it has become something that you pretty much have to do every year in order to be compliant with MOC. So moving on down the road, I want to first of all say this is the emblem that we use from changeboardresearch.com, where you can find extensive literature on the subject. And the AAPS is the leading national organization challenging MOC, with some support from Docs for Patient Care, and they're listed down below as well. I want to point out that there is a no MOC petition which arose just 10 days ago on March 10th, and it's about recalling and causing the ABIM to stop the maintenance of certification, and it has over 3,000 signatures in this short period of time. It does not go as far as I think it should, but it is there. I wanted to bring everyone's attention to it. You can see the website at the bottom, and if anyone ever wants information, you can always contact me directly. If you go to changeboardresearch.com or just Google Kempen and MOC MOL, you'll find extensive literature in this regard. Now, the whole thing about licensing and certification, 100 years ago, there were no licenses, there were no MOC, there were no board certifications, and these arose basically as a gilding phenomenon in order for physicians to somehow lift themselves up above the crowd to appear better. They're marketing techniques. And the greatest utility of board certification, besides documenting that you've gone through training and reached a certain stature, it allows other people to evaluate your residency training program based on the percentage of people who certify after completion. But the issue is it's a gilding phenomenon used to constrict the availability of physicians coming in primarily from foreign countries. And that is how the Federation of State Medical Boards first originated with the ECFMG, Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, and they developed the FLEX. The FSMB concentrated upon medical students coming into practice, whereas the American Board of Medical Specialties concentrated upon making specialists out of general practitioners. And the biggest reason why MOC should not be used to determine whether a person should be licensed or paid by an insurance company is because there's over 167 different individual certificates that the ABMS sells on the market. And I say sells because they are a corporation, they're a nonprofit corporation, but they sell these things to sustain themselves as an entity. Many of the leadership of these organizations have earned as much as $1.2 million in salaries for the year. The difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is a for-profit charges for services to provide them, whereas a nonprofit provides the services and charges so that they can maintain the service. So it is a very minor difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit institution in terms of what it's all about. And we're going to go in further with this and see that there's a great deal of ethical conflict based in these nonprofits. Also important is this is a slide from the New England Journal of Medicine about graduate medical education. Here we see the foreign medical graduates who sign up into the residency training programs versus the osteopaths versus the allopathic physicians. And we see that there's about 25% of all the residents at this point in time are foreign medical graduates, as was I. I was born in America, raised in America, went to the University of Michigan, and as a junior year abroad student, went to Germany originally for a year, got into medical school, and stayed there for 10 years to finish my education and practice and absolve residency in Europe. So the confrontation that I have is I've never shied away from any challenge. I have more CME than I'd care to shake a stick at, and although I certified in 1989 and received a lifelong certificate, I did recertify in 2005 just to see what it's all about, and I've never studied for or learned anything from one of these tests. And CME, lifelong learning, that is something that we all do and we all need to do to maintain our abilities. But the reality is not only is 25% of the physicians in training foreign medical graduates, but 25% of practicing physicians are foreign medical graduates as well. We in America do rely heavily upon physicians coming in from abroad, but all of this, the FSMB licensing regulation and all the ABMS certification regulations are built at keeping foreigners out. And if you're a professor at the University of Berlin and you want to come to the United States to practice medicine, you get to start a residency as an internship. And it's just plain silly to look at it that way. But I say that to emphasize that these are protectionistic mechanisms that have evolved over centuries. And the certification industry is nothing but a promise. Here are several emblems: American Board of Medical Specialties, higher standards, better care. That's their logo. But there's no data out there that proves that being board certified makes you better, makes your care better, or makes for a better care for patients. People who do take the boards are better. They don't become better because they take the boards. And the difference between the board certification and the good housekeeping seal is that the good housekeeping gives you a guarantee. If you don't like the product, you get your money back. None of these other certification industries even go there. So licensing and credentialing, licensing you need to practice this American Board of Medical Specialties certification. They even state that it's voluntary. But is it truly voluntary when they're out there lobbying Congress, lobbying hospital organizations, bureaucrats, with the idea that unless you're board certified, you must be an inferior doctor? There are 25% of the doctors out there practicing are giving good care and have never been certified. If you look at the history of it, this is an article from the American Board of Internal Medicine. These are all leaders in the American boards and the task force on recertification. And we see that the ABIM has been endorsing recertification for decades. They tried a voluntary program and it failed miserably. In '86, the ABM concluded that voluntary recertification would be a failure, and they started adopting prospective time-limited certificates to force physicians to comply. And it's a protectionistic mechanism. When the family practitioners and the pediatricians in emergency medicine wanted to come online as specialties, these were the people that were pushing them to have time-limited certificates for exclusionary reasons because they competed with internal medicine. And in 1990, all ABIM certificates became 10-year limited certificates, so that in 2000, through the push of the ABIM and the ABMS, all boards were required to go to 10-year certificates or lose their franchise. And many of the boards fought this, but they didn't fight it hard enough. They didn't want to lose their franchise. As an example of how voluntary recertification failed, you see here the numbers that only went down over the years from 3,355 to 1,403 over this 12-year period. And they readily recognized that this would not occur voluntarily, i.e., it's not something physicians wanted. And this is board certification, if MOC was so excellent, then they should compete on the free market with all the other CME out there. And if they truly had a product that was of value, people would take it and sign up for it and learn it. That's not the case. They are forcing physicians to comply with MOC by coupling board certification to it. Board certification, as Dr. Christman said, is something that is useful as an outcome, a parameter from people emerging from residency to reach a standard to demonstrate that they've actually done more than just on-the-job learning, minimal throughout their residency training. However, by coupling MOC, a totally new product, and I call it a product because it's a corporate product, they are forcing people into MOC because otherwise they will lose the board certification that they require. And regulatory capture occurs when a special interest, i.e. the ABMS, goes up to Congress, lobbies with them, makes them and insurance companies believe that they need to have this in order to pay physicians. They attack the regulatory agencies, as a means to their end. And they have declared themselves the sole official agents of the verification of the FSMB verifies student education things, and the ABMS has targeted the physician population. The FSMB has seen the opportunity now. It used to be you took the ECFMG or you took the Flex, one-time testing, you were good. Then it was the USMLE Part 1, then Part 2, then Part 3. And now they'd like to introduce a Part 4 for physicians to take every 5 to 10 years for the rest of the life. And the FSMB is targeting those physicians who did not get their board certification, or down the road it'll be the ones who fall out of the ABMS certification system and can't get back in without going back into residency. These are the burdens that are being pushed upon physicians by these non-governmental agencies which have no authority whatsoever. The funny part about it is that no one regulates either the FSMB or the ABMS. They merely claim to be the entities that are responsible for this, and these entities claim to need to control physicians' competency or verify their competency, because if they don't do it, government will. But the problem is there are multiple government agencies, and I'll get to that momentarily, that are already doing this. Every state medical board is built upon multiple physicians in that organization monitoring with regulatory capacity the licensure of physicians. There is absolutely no need for private corporate entities to come claim to be voluntary and then push upon physicians a program that they don't need. Let it compete with everything else. If it's good, people will buy it. So who else is watching? I mean, this is from the State Medical Board of Ohio. They've listed all these other entities out there that look after doctors. And again, if physicians don't self-regulate, the government will. The ABMS is using fear to drive their recertification, the fear of not getting paid because you're not board certified. And that is a strong arm tactic which has to be recognized as highly unethical, because there is no outcome-based studies that demonstrate that being certified does anything for anyone. I have asked the organization, my National Society, to review the matter in terms of malpractice lawsuits against anesthesia personnel, and the only difference between certified and non-certified physicians is the amount of the award that is produced if you lose. That is, board certified doctors pay more when they lose their lawsuit, and that is the incidence, the occurrence, the severity, it's all the same. When I reviewed it, I got one set of numbers for everything except the payouts. Is the issue of incompetency really a major issue? I mean, everyone talks about the one guy they know that doesn't do too well, but is he truly incompetent? Probably not, because he's still on medical staff or still practicing. Disciplinary actions in Ohio, I reviewed the case logs in 2011, and I found there was only one out of all of the actions that were done that could be attributed possibly to incompetence. You couldn't know for sure because the data was not open data, it was sealed, and the patient, this particular doctor, retired. But when you look through it, overall impairment, and that's drug and alcohol abuse or other forms of self-medication as the major problem, criminal actions, fraud against Medicare, Medicaid, or sexual transgressions with patients, things like that, or actions by boards from other states are what come along as the major problems among physicians. And these are very smart people that are working impaired or creating criminal actions, and they are not picked up by the American Board of Medical Specialists, again emphasizing as a modality to verify that physicians are competent or not. It's totally inappropriate. And using the numbers from 2011, the incidence of incompetence is 0.002%, remarkably non-existent. Now, the issue has come along. Grandfathers, people like myself who have been board certified so long ago that they bought a lifelong certificate, will you need to continue on with MOC? Well, lifelong learning is obligate, but the theory is that grandfathers don't need to complete MOC at all. But however, the ABIM is pushing this and will begin reporting whether or not we are meeting MOC requirements as an index open on the internet so that people will know if we are or not. And they've become organizations that sell the verification that you are going to need in order to participate in this Medicare, Medicaid payments, the PQRS, MOC payments, which you can earn if you can comply with MOC. Do you as a grandfather need to pass the MOC exam? In 2023, you will need to do that in order to be meeting MOC requirements. Otherwise, you'll be listed as certified, not meeting MOC requirements. And that's a long way down the road, but with the push of the ABMS, this can, through lobbying in Congress, lobbying with insurance companies, lobbying with the hospital organizations, this can be something that will force physicians, even the grandfathers, to comply. The take-home message is, I don't care who you are, certified or not, if you continue with board certification as a necessity, grandfathered or not, you will either comply with their requirements or you're just going to have to step back and just say no. And I think we need to step back and just say no. Physicians are being hired by hospitals. We've become tools of the healthcare industry in where we have to compete and comply with mandates, real or inappropriate, that come down. For an example, is board certification does not absolve me from the need to produce an ACLS, acute cardiac life support certificate every 2 years. ACLS was the original, or BCLS as well. The American Heart Association started decades ago to do their certification, which was first time, not time limited, then it became time limited because the money is there. With a trauma, a TLS, the same thing. First of all, it was not time limited, and then it became time limited. These certification organizations are expanding, are growing in number and in authority, causing us to spend more and more time away from the patient bedside, trying to deal with the realities of meeting their needs. And this is from the AMA website, indicating the payments that were to be paid up through 2014 for people who complied with MOC and subscribed to the American Board of their gender and received the verification to submit to the federal government to get the payment, this 0.5% payment increase for their MOC participation. But the reality is, I went and reviewed the year 2011. I got the data from the federal government. They spent $1 million, but only around 900 physicians participated out of 850,000 doctors. So they paid $1 million in 2011, but in 2015 and 2016, they're going to start extracting 1.5 and 2% from us who participate in Medicare or Medicaid if we do not comply to the MOC requirement. And complying means not only doing MOC, paying for it every year, and taking the time on our Saturdays and Sundays to do whatever it is they're demanding of us. It also means going to your board and paying them $50 to $100 at this point in time for that little piece of paper to send into the government. So they're making money hand over foot, coming and going. Now, this is a statement from the American Board of Anesthesiology, and I throw it up here with the underline just to identify the fact that in 2010, this statement came out. And this is the text, and I'm going to read it to you. Based on the understanding of the current CMS requirements, that's Medicare and Medicaid, the American Board of Anesthesiology does not believe that the additional requirements for the MOC bonus, this PQRS bonus, will be a sufficient impact on patient care, nor the reimbursement bonus will justify the additional time and resource burden on its deployments. Accordingly, the ABA, the American Board of Anesthesia, does not intend to submit an application for CMS approval of an ABA MOC PQRS program in 2011. My board identified the fact that it wasn't going to pay enough. It was a lot of trouble. The board itself didn't even want to mess with it. But this year they became providers under the CME, the MOC PQRS program, because they have to. This is what the ABMS has mandated. And they went to Congress and lobbied for this, and they hold the franchise over all the boards who will comply. I've personally talked to probably 10 different ex-board members of the ABA and of other boards, and I've come away with a firm conclusion and statement from these people that these various boards did not want to go down this road. They resisted where possible, but they merely succumbed to the pressure reality of purchasing a franchise and running it. Now, This is a quote from the ABMS. About a year and a half ago, an article appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, an expose on MOC, which was neither favorable nor disfavorable regarding ABMS and their program. But this prompted the ABMS to go and issue a web page with data, etc., statements, and this was one of their take-home statements. Fact, the ABMS recognizes that regardless of the profession, be it healthcare, law enforcement, education, or accounting, there is no certification that guarantees performance or positive outcomes. And I bring this up because this is their statement. They themselves realize we're selling certificates which really impart nothing upon anything. I think it's a very strong statement. They've also gone and attempted to do meta-analysis. This slide here shows meta-analysis was not feasible. They went back and looked at this is in year 2002. These are all American Board of Medical Specialists chairmen and executives, and they funded this thing. Dr. Horowitz and Dr. Miller are executive vice presidents. They did a meta-analysis and they concluded that only 5% of the studies had methods appropriate for the research question, and the number of these was inadequate to do a meta-analysis. And they only support an association between board certification status and positive clinical outcomes, which is all very poorly described. This is a retrospective study, and I think it's important to bring to bear the fact that a randomized controlled trial can bring information that's a causal in improving the basis of knowledge. But when they take these retrospective chart reviews and go back and try to formulate a conclusion, the influence of bias in a corporation, the Medical Board of Medical Specialties, with their employed individuals analyzing data based on their prerogatives, the bias is inherently so large as to make it irrelevant. Now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the leadership. This is a picture of Christine Castle. She was the CEO of the American Board of Internal Medicine for over a decade. And if we look here, we see that she certified in 1979, had an indefinite certificate, and never recertified in internal medicine. She did maintain geriatric medicine certification, one of the 167 sub-certificates available through the ABMS, but she was on the task force for defining the parameters for certification, and this geriatric certification based on her task force on which she participated was only valid if you had an internal medicine certificate that was valid. So she really didn't buy into her own program. She never recertified in internal medicine, although that was the program she was selling. Dr. Chowdhury is the chairman of the FSMB, the president and the CEO. He's not certified in internal medicine. This is an ABIM printout. He certified in 96. It was valid through 2006. It expired. And he, being a DO, chose to go and then recertify with the DO board, because at that point in time, they didn't require you to be recertified, and they had no time limits on their certifications. MOC has only arisen for the DOs in the last year and a half. So although he's the leader of the FSMB, which is pushing MOL as hard as it can, he doesn't believe in recertifying. And in communications with Dr. Talmadge, one of the board members with the FSMB, he indicated that the FSMB is promoting a program to allow people like Dr. Chowdhury, who have not practiced medicine for years, to be able to maintain their certification as non-clinicians through special tactics. It depends on who you know more than what you know. Lois Margaret Nora is the new Chief Executive Officer and President of the American Board of Medical Specialties. She certified back in 1987 and never recertified through 1/13/2013. Now she got her presidency. She's a lawyer as well. She's been practicing law for years, but in early 2014, she actually went back and completed MOC and got recredentialed because there was a need to be recredentialed to represent this organization. The take-home message here is the elite of these organizations do not recertify. I went and reviewed the list of executive editors of my journal, the American Board of Anesthesiology, and I would urge you to take your specialty journal and review the editors there to see if it's true for you as well. But I found that the vast majority, 90% of the editors and the editors there never recertified before it became mandated, and many of them have never recertified. And if you look at foreign editors, none of them have board certification. Again, bringing home the message that this is an American marketing corporation. It is targeted American marketplaces, and it doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. Now, recently, the American Board of Medical Specialists purchased time to produce a supplement in a journal, the Journal of Medical Education, and in that supplement, it costs them around $35,000 to $50,000 to support that supplement. They published only articles that were supportive of MOC, and you can bring that up on their website. In short, they produced a prospectus for their own product, and the reality of that is, if you were to take an antibiotic and purchase a supplement and push it like that, people would find that to be unethical. The unethical components of this is that certification has its function. MOC is unproven. It's basically a product that is being marketed to make money. It doesn't improve quality in any way. The executives don't buy into it. They only comply when they're forced to. And I don't think we should be subjected to this sort of extortion by a group of individuals of such low ethics. This is a paper that was done by a group out of Texas. They went and looked at the executive members of these various organizations. They found the numbers of them, and the recertified rates is extremely low among these executives of these various organizations. And in the subspecialty, the response is no better, really, not significantly better. The issue is, why are they forcing the working physicians who are down there in the trenches, working every day, doing good care, to subscribe to a program that they personally don't believe in, when these leaders are basically administrators who do not even practice medicine either significantly or probably at all? Well, they probably see a need for recertification because none of them really are up to date through practice and only become updated through these educational components. It's truly a product that serves the academic industry. Now, I want to mention Choosing Wisely. This is an offshoot of the ABIM Foundation. They've gone to many, not all, of the boards and asked them to pick the 5 tests that we should not be doing because they're wasteful. And this is a brainchild of Christine Castle, who I mentioned before. And her theory is, if we could stop wasting money on unnecessary testing, we would be able to finance Obamacare. But the reality of it is, it's from the ABIM itself, and they are pushing tests on all doctors who are not incompetent, with a very low rate of competency, to make money and waste money. The ABMS and the affiliates consume over $400 million each year before MOC came along. And when MOC is now on the line, they will be making more, because the CME, your AMA PRA points, grade 1 and grade 2, will, under this concept, become irrelevant because you will need MOC points. And so they will become the new ACCME accreditation agency for CME, because you'll need MOC points, and they are the sole exclusive determiners of what is worthwhile or not. The importance of this is, the CME industry is currently about a $2.5 billion a year industry, and they want to employ regulatory capture to take control of our CME industries under their leadership. Now, the whole concept of testing all physicians every 5, 10 years, whatever it is that they're trying to do, to find the 20 physicians that could possibly be incompetent is, the problem with that is, if you're incompetent, you're probably not going to take the test, so the test won't find you. And to waste that much money when you're having failure rates of recertification applicants in family practice, 33% failure rates in internal medicine, 28% failure rates on the recertification test occurred in recent years. And these are practicing physicians who are out there working day in, day out in the trenches, providing good care and good medicine to patients, perhaps in rural or distant from university settings. They're performing real work. And family practice and internal medicine, these are the primary care physician specialties where the shortfall seems to be the greatest. The federal government is pushing hard to see that people go into that, and there we have the greatest failure rates among the testing of practicing physicians, basically to feed the income of the board certification industry. Again, competency issues are extremely rare based on Ohio data, and none of the boards really even list incompetency as an issue because it is so rare. Now, how do we combat MOC and MOL? Dr. Christman and I, 4 years ago, recognized the problem when Ohio was targeted as the first state in the United States to become the Federation's first pilot state for their MOL program. And we took it to the Ohio State Medical Association, and we put it on the agenda, and without resistance of any kind, it was resolved that we actively oppose any efforts of the State Medical Board of Ohio to implement anything different in terms of maintenance of licensure than those currently in place for physicians in Ohio. And they further went on to state that MOL was not to be done. Through your state, the biggest state organization that you have, you need to come together, bring these resolutions to the floor, and the AAPS and I and Dr. Christman are more than happy to give you templates to do that, because all politics are local. The national organizations, your specialty societies are all entrenched in the MOC. You can't open up a specialty journal without reading about the MOC programs that they are selling as well. They are going to capture the CME money, and they're all doing very, very well selling to physicians the MOC products, which 10 years ago were non-existent. And in Ohio, we got the 15 societies to come together. These are their emblems under the Ohio State Medical Association to oppose the MOL, MOC impositions that were upon us. And without any hesitancy, we won that battle in Ohio, and you can do this in any state. We further resolved that we form a task force to explore alternate methods other than maintenance of certification for physicians to demonstrate ongoing competency, whereby the standard CME programs are the alternative. We need to remain with CME verification. Physicians as a professional group typically provide the greatest number of CME points or hours every year as required under law than lawyers or any other group. Nurses are down around 10 to 20 by and large. We are up at 50 CMEs a year. So there is no need to verify continuing education because it is happening. We are lifelong learners. We cannot afford to not be up to date because the pharmaceutical companies are marketing their products. Other medical devices are being marketed on the television sets every day around the evening news. All of the new anticoagulants that have come out, people will come in and ask you about them. You cannot afford to not be up to date. As an example, New York also formed resolutions. I think there are currently 7 states that have formed active resolutions against MOC and MOL, which is why in summer of 2013 in Chicago, even the AMA was forced to deal with the issues of MOC and MOL. And if you follow the internet literature in your specialty and other specialties, you will see that this battle is happening because it is a serious battle. It's going to cost you money. And when the increased number of physicians being hired by hospitals, we will become tools of the insurance industry and the hospital industry because they are going to either have the patients or going to be the employers of physicians unless we act now. So how to organize? All politics are local. You need to start with your state organizations. Dr. Christman and I in Ohio had very little difficulty in getting momentum to stop this extortion of physicians. You need to work with the national organizations. AAPS is clearly the leader. You need to go through your state societies up to the AMA and push it there because most federal government and large national organizations still believe that the AMA represents physicians, although it's down to, I think, around 16% of all physicians belong to the AMA. But under the pressures of MOC and MOL, I think their numbers are rising as well. The AAPS, as Dr. Christman indicated, is a much stronger proponent for the physician in this regard. And you need to define the truth and expose the lies. My job for the past 4 years has been, as an academic physician, gathering the data, gathering the studies, putting it out on the changeboardresearch.com website for people to view, and exposing the lies, getting the data that we need in order to push the ABMS lies and expose them as being such. And require certification. Board certified is of itself a past tense connotation. I believe that we as physicians need to recognize that you go through residency, you become certified, and then you maintain your competency with every single patient that you treat every day, every year for the rest of your life, and maintain lifelong learning through the journals. If the federal government wanted to improve healthcare in the United States, I contend what they would need to do is to have the National Library of Medicine, every article that is ever submitted to them and which is published as a reference in the PubMed indexing system, that at least after 6 months after it comes out in print, that it be freely available to any physician, any time of the day and night, or patients for that matter, through the internet. The internet is a powerful organ. That is where information should be readily available. To have to go down to a university library to look through their literature to find information on healthcare or studies upon the care of patients is a ridiculous proposition when these institutions all have their libraries online. As I worked at the Cleveland Clinic, at any computer I can access virtually any published article at any time. And the importance of this is if we rely upon these PubMed abstracts, if 1 out of 1,000 patients dies from disease X, or 2 out of 1,000 patients die of disease X, if you go from 2 out of 1,000 to 1 out of 1,000, that's either a 50% improvement, or if you turn it around, 100% improvement. But in reality, it's an infinitesimal, insignificant change in healthcare. And so many of these publications are being marketed by the ABMS and other industries to physicians to indicate that their products are good, important, and do things which they do not. And if you were able to read the whole article, you would know that. And that is why I've made it my mission to try to gather data and put it out there for everyone to see. You cannot require certification or recertification for hospital privileges, group memberships, or insurance payment and participation. This is against the free market principles that we all hold dearly, and the FTC may at some point get involved. If we recognize this as true extortion products, I think it would have implications for the RICO laws. On so many levels, this concept is so unethical as to demand attack at this point in time. We all know the Godfather. Certification improves nothing. Physicians are and remain competent for many reasons and not because of MOC. The ABMS continues to sell that MOC is associated with better care. And most of this has to do with the fact that in their tests and the way that they verify the validity or the quality improvement of MOC is that they can test people on their compliance to guidelines. But guidelines, they change every day. If you didn't really review them in recent times, you probably would not pick what they want you to pick. At the same time, these guidelines, they apply to everyone somewhat and really no particular patient specifically. And the reality of the matter is that guidelines are typically based upon expert opinion and not on sound outcome-based studies whatsoever. So that a new concept in medicine has emerged, that of rejection of previous studies. There was an article that came out in the Mayo Clinic Proceedings just in the last 6 months that reviewed 1 year worth of articles in the New England Journal of Medicine and found that 38% of the ones that they reviewed rejected previous guidelines or findings of proof. So that many of us, the grandfathers, the older physicians out there who are familiar with experience and their patients, may not choose the guidelines recommendation. My favorite example is right now ACLS. Let's face it, breathing is optional, but I'm an anesthesiologist. If I go to a code, I'm putting a breathing tube in to protect the airway. Breathing is not optional. The airway needs to be secured. We need to protect the lungs. And the reality is that guidelines, again, ACLS guidelines, have been dumbed down to the point so that the person on the street can act like a treating physician by these guidelines and not incur anxiety or fear about whatever it is they're doing. By going down the road of MOC and going down the road of guidelines as being the verbatim 10 laws from God, we are creating a situation where active thinking on behalf of a physician is not credible. You have to comply with the guidelines. And this facilitates the ability of non-physicians, i.e. nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, CRNAs, to actually practice medicine because, well, it's just follow the guidelines, follow the logarithm. But as I said before, these do not meet the needs of individual patients well. Another reason to think twice about signing up for MOC, this is the standard contract of the American Board of Pathology, which I use as an example, but this is what they're all starting to look like. And everything yellow here are rights that you have given up to the various boards as soon as you sign on the dotted line to become one of the applicants to the MOC process. And you are not allowed to challenge the boards. They are the sole decisive factors in whether a question is right or wrong. And if you go to one of the meetings and the ABIM, actually, I went out to Boston to the internal medicine meeting here last year, and they ran half of the CMEs were for MOC points preparation for the boards, and they had experts in the fields of cardiac medicine or urology reading the questions, and at least half the time the answer was it could be A or B, but we really don't know. So the questions themselves, and if you go back to the Dr. Christman referred to the YouTube video that was online recently, even this person who did the board questions stated that he sat there in the test and looked at questions, and he knew there was no right answer. There's only a best answer. And there's problems with all that. Giving up your rights to submit yourself in a standard contract only exemplifies the fact that this is a business, and the lawyers are out there, and the CEOs and the CFOs are out there making a lot of money on your abilities. Then you've all flown in an airplane. You've all seen this ad in the in-flight magazine, the top doctors of America. Maybe you're better off spending your $15,000 to buy an ad like this that people might read to prove that you are such a great doctor rather than rely upon a board certification, which people know nothing about. I've made it a habit over the past 4 years when I'm flying in an airplane to talk to people and ask them, do you know what board certified is? And unless they're in the medical profession as a nurse or a physician, people don't know what it is. The ABMS would have you believe otherwise. It is not on the radar of anyone except administrators for insurance companies and hospitals and other people like ourselves who are familiar with the term. And it's been degraded over time. This is an example of the text of my first 1989. I was a licensed graduate, and I met the requirements of the board, and I'm qualified to serve as a consultant in anesthesiology. Then it was mere maintenance of certification, and it was time limited. And if you think it's going to stay there, this is a recent American Board of Dermatology, and if you look at this text down here, you will read that this 10-year certificate is valid through 2023, contingent upon participation in and completion of maintenance of certification. That is to say, if you don't keep your MOC points flowing, you will lose your certification at any time when they determine it. And if you are required to be board certified when you're working for the hospital or the insurance program, and suddenly they come back to you and say, wait, yours expired, your MOC points aren't there, you're suddenly out of work. This has happened to people. I mean, it is ridiculous to believe that because you didn't purchase your points or 2023 came along that suddenly from 1 minute or 1 day to the next, you've become incompetent is completely ridiculous. But it is a nonsense requirement that these people are pushing upon physicians without any doubt, in my mind, to make money. Now, this is another issue. Christine Castle went over to the quality assurance departments and switched positions with Dr. Barron, has now come over to the ABIM. And there are other certification industries that are rising up out of the grass. You can become a medical home certified content expert. And notice the trademark here. This is a product that you can buy for money and then comply with the educational process, the MOC points, in order to be, excuse me, a certified medical home physician. Christine Castle at the National Quality Forum recently came under fire because of kickbacks that were occurring by Dr. Charles Denham in his participation in other industries while being associated with the National Quality Forum. And the National Quality Forum is another nonprofit organization which is funded by your tax dollars to a large degree to try to improve quality, but they make up arbitrarily what quality is. And Dr. Denham, he was involved in a ChloroPreps scam with a $40 million settlement with CareFusion Corporation regarding kickback payments. And Dr. Cassell came under fire with this as well. And to the point where they investigated her and found that she was getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional outside compensation after she was hired for the National Quality Forum. I believe one was from the Kaiser Foundation. At this point in time, I can't remember the other one. She has since stepped down from these two positions to maintain her CEO position on the National Quality Forum. But the bottom line is these people have very limited ethical sight. They're in it for the money, although Castle was making over $800,000 a year working for the ABIM. She had her fingers in the pot elsewhere, and I have no idea how many millions of dollars she was earning every year off of the backs of working physicians. So there's corruption in medicine. Dr. Cassell stands there with her National Quality Forum, a misnomer perhaps. The other issue was the Journal of Continuing Health Education and Professions in December of 2013 had a paid supplement published for the ABMS full of their articles pushing MOC and MOL. And often when you read the articles of these people, the biggest, most flagrant sin is that although it's funded by the ABMS, it's published, authored by ABMS executives, you will find on that document no conflicts of interest to declare. I mean, you're buying the time, you're paying for the publication, you're paying people to produce the data. The data is suspicious due to bias upfront anyway, and yet there's no conflicts of interest. And this is another issue that must be addressed. Lifelong learning validation mechanisms abound. We have the state board licensures, the AMA PRA CME basis, and in this issue of the supplement, they did allow Canadian and British systems to promote MOC, because in Canada it's called MOC and in England it's called revalidation, but these systems in those countries are basically similar to the AMA Physicians Recognition Award, CME, where you find the things that you want to learn that you feel are important for your practice, you collect your points and you verify them. They're not cheap, but at least they are not subscription products from an overseer, overlord company making money. This is an example of the failure to comply with journal ethics. We see here a paper from the American Board of Family Medicine. This is a journal published by the Family Medicine Board. It's from the American Academy of Family Physicians, and the American Board of Family Medicine, with funding provided by the ABFM, produced this article. It's indexed on PubMed, and they have no conflicts of interest to declare, although everyone works for the American Board of Family Medicine. They paid for the study, they paid for the publication. This is an example of the lack of ethics in the people who are deciding whether you should be practicing medicine based on board certification. And this is another, the Journal of Medical Regulation, another journal. It's not PubMed indexed, but it's from the Federation of State Medical Boards. It's their journal. These are their executives. They are producing these things, and they call it science so that it's out there for bureaucrats, politicians, and administrators to read and understand that they are the sole source of what doctors need to do. And again, Dr. Chowdhury doesn't even practice medicine anymore. It doesn't stop there. Certification is merely a branding. It's an advertisement. And such activity has long been despised by medicine and physicians. I mean, you're not supposed to go out there and run full paid ads, although some people are starting to do this. It's an unethical procedure. It is unwanted as selling sham surgery or ineffective therapy. So exposing this practice as not being an indicator of quality is important for us as physicians to our patients to help gain the momentum we need, because we are faced with a certification industry that is only growing and expanding. We are faced with a hospital industry run by bureaucrats that are not necessarily physicians. Politicians are being lobbied into believing this. And the problem with medicine is they've divided us and conquered us. With 167 different specialties under 24 boards, they've got us so separately working, and these national societies are in it for the money as well. They actually earn more money on their MOC point products than the board does, the $400 million a year on their testing and certification industry, that it's difficult to fight on a national level, which is why, again, I emphasize going through your biggest state organizations and attacking it at the state level and coalescing through these state organizations at the AMA and using that as a means of attack. Your state organizations, you pay your dues, they have legal departments, they are politically connected. These are the mechanisms that every physician in every state needs to advance in order to fight this monster. And again, this is, I think, particularly shameful, is that the boards are now licensing major institutions, hospital systems like the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic, because of the practice improvement modules. You know, to have every physician out there experimenting on patients, again, I've referred to as being a problem. I mean, the classical example is diabetes. Get those hemoglobin A1C levels down to normal. If you're running 8 and 9, you need to push them down, demonstrate that you're making care better. But in dropping the glucose levels on the average in the blood, you will probably incur hypoglycemia. And if your push to maintain your certification involves treating 100 patients as research subjects, in which one of them has a hypoglycemic event, for example, driving down the highway, drives off into a tree and dies, that won't show up in your practice improvement module, but I really don't think you've improved care. And we've seen so many guidelines come and go. The perioperative beta blockade was going to be the answer to all of our heart ischemia during operations, and we wound up just killing more people from stroke. The tight glucose control perioperatively proved to be a ridiculous concept because it was only useful in highly restrictive research settings, and when applied in a widespread fashion resulted in more detriment than good. So to invite physicians to individually institute in their private practice on patients who are not informed nor consented to subject themselves to practice improvement modules is a problem. So now the ABMS is selling opportunity to the major institutions like the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic to have the hospital develop their quality programs for all the physicians in the hospital to be conscribed in, so that they can, with $5,000 or $10,000 a year, get all the practice improvement modules covered for all their physicians. What this amounts to is that none of the physicians who are involved really probably have anything at all to do with the practice improvement module. It's being done by the hospital. They'll send their clipboard-toting nurses around to gather the data and some business manager to write it up, and maybe 1 or 2 physicians might be involved in writing it up, but it will apply and give all the physicians in those institutions the opportunity to scam and get around the PIM requirement through payments through these major institutions. Don't kid yourself. This is big corporate product, big corporate medicine that's out there hurting doctors. I want to point, I found this to be an interesting slide. This is the growth in the numbers of physicians over the years from 70 to 2009. And here we have all the bureaucrats. And then we wonder why healthcare has become so expensive. We have certification industries expanding, insurance industries expanding, and the ACA was pushed by the hospitals and the insurance industries because they saw a chance to gain a lot of money in the production of this. We have to go back to a patient and a doctor in healthcare and cut down on the number of administrators and the number of procedures that doctors have to go through simply to get through the daily work in terms of treating patients. And so at this point in time, I would say just say no and stop paying extortion money to the boards. They've used the bait and switch mechanism, the Ponzi scheme, on the historical basis of board certification, which has nothing to do with MOC. It's just the way to force you into the new product, the unproven product of maintenance of certification to help fund these industrial sponsors. And with that, I'll turn this over to questions or Dr. Christman.
Well, listen, Dr. Kempen, thank you very much for that brilliant presentation. Um, for those of you who've joined us recently, we are looking for your questions. We know that some of you have questions. Turn them in either verbally or in writing, and we'll cover those starting in about 10 minutes. In the meantime, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the patient safety people and the quality people, as I call them. I also sometimes like to consider them to be the elite, which is really what they are. But whenever you hear that term patient safety or quality, your antennas should go up. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Denham, Charles Denham, who I think Dr. Kempen just briefly mentioned. Dr. Denham actually was a physician, still is. He started out life as a radiotherapist, but he decided he was going to be a quality person. So he joined the quality industry and started advocating and running foundations and doing all kinds of things to improve that elusive patient quality that he felt so strongly about. Of course, he made it clear to everybody that he came across that this was strictly a, a, a humanitarian effort of his, and it turned out that he ultimately made his way onto the National Quality Forum, the NQF, where he was involved in some of the committees there. National Quality Forum has lots and lots of committees, and they pass judgment on what constitutes quality and what does not. And he somehow got also mixed up with Care Fusion, which was a very, very large company, it still is. But Care Fusion actually was fined recently $40.1 million by the U.S. Department of Justice because Care Fusion had, I consider it a bribe, had paid Dr. Charles Denham $11.6 million in return for his efforts to get a quality product that Care Fusion made that was supposed to pass this muster of quality so that the National Quality Forum would then be the arbiter of what quality was, and then that virtual monopoly would go to Care Fusion and its product, which was called Chloroprep. Interestingly enough, in my office, we used a product, an antiseptic cleanser called Technicare. And I recently have wondered just why it went off the market. We were very happy with it. We wanted to buy more, and we couldn't. And we still have a little bit left from what we had ordered and bought a number of years ago. But it's off the market. And I don't know why, because we had wonderful results with it. We were very happy with it. Maybe somebody else knows, and maybe somebody else can share with me why Technicare went off the market. But anyway, Chloroprep became highly profitable to Care Fusion, and Care Fusion had, as I said, paid Dr. Charles Denham $11.6 million for his effort to determine that this particular product was quality. Well, this is what happens when you get these kinds of organizations involved with determining what quality is. And so happens that the individual who is right now the CEO of National Quality Forum is Dr. Christine Castle. And who is she? Well, as Dr. Kempen just mentioned, she recently has been the CEO of the American Board of Internal Medicine. Well, who is the current president of the American Board of Internal Medicine? Well, it's Dr. Richard Barron. Well, where did Dr. Barron come from? Well, he came from National Quality Forum. So you see, this whole area of quality becomes more than just quality. It becomes an arena in which high-paid executives, some of them are doctors, unfortunately, are getting involved to pass judgment on what quality really is. Now, who funds National Quality Forum? Interestingly enough, it's largely funded by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. And that I consider to be very unfortunate, because here you have the federal government actually setting up an environment in which all of this, and I'm going to call it corruption, Dr. Bob Wachter, who was a previous president of the American Board of Internal Medicine, called it a scandal. And I don't know, I could call it a scandal too, a scandal of corruption, whatever it is. But certainly there's a lot of money being passed back and forth amongst the quality people and right in the center of it are the specialty medical boards, particularly the ABIM. Now, I want to go on just a few minutes and talking about the Choosing Wisely campaign, which started with ABIM and then metastasized to other boards. And if we look closely at what's going on with Choosing Wisely, the program there is to limit what kinds of tests are being done and ordered by physicians. Now, some of these I think have merit. I think some of the concepts of limiting expensive tests that are maybe unnecessary, there's probably a place for some of that. I'm not going to disagree. But some of them I have to wonder about. Some of them, like a recommendation to not treat children with ear infections with antibiotics. Well, why is that? I thought that's what we were supposed to do, is treat patients with disease. Another one is to not seek testing and screening for prostate cancer by doing digital exams and other screening examinations. To me, that doesn't make sense. I thought we as physicians were supposed to detect early cancers. But unfortunately, what's happening with the Choosing Wisely campaign is it's morphing into the boards and its requirements for recertification. So I'm going to pose this question before we turn it over to you all for questions. Are physicians going to sacrifice and risk their careers if they're being mandated by Choosing Wisely to limit what's in their patient's best interests? Are they going to risk losing their certification and their careers and do what's best for their patients, or do what they need to do to maintain board recertification? And I'm not sure what the answer is going to be. Maybe some heroic doctors will choose on behalf of their patients. I hope so. At this time, thank you very much for listening so far, and now it's your turn. And I'm going to turn the time over to Jeremy Snavely, who is going to moderate the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christman, and thank you all for submitting your questions. We have a long list of questions here, and I think we can get through all of them. And just a reminder, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, please raise your hand by clicking the hand raise icon on your GoToMeeting control panel. And otherwise, if you'd like to submit it in a written form, type it in the chat box. But we have a long list here to work through, and we'll start now. The first question is, we're going to go to our AAPS Executive Director, Jane Orient. Dr. Orient.
Thank you. Dr. Kempen, one of the most interesting things you said that actually seemed new to me is this idea that these patients are being used in unconsented research for these equivalent of practice or performance improvement modules. And there are a couple things about this. One is it's really designed research. It's not equipped to follow up results. I mean, we're still arguing about the results of the Framingham study, which was done decades ago. There's no real way to find out the outcomes as far as benefits versus harms, the adverse effects of all the drugs and so on that might be used. Another thing that occurs to me is that it really encourages cheating. I've read a letter to the editor by Steffi Wohlhandler and David Himmelstein, Physicians for National Health Fund, that I don't think much of, but they did sort of expose the fact that they might be encouraging the people who take blood pressures to fudge a little bit and say round down to prove that they have improved things, rather than rounding up before the study starts, because you've got to demonstrate an improvement, which means kind of you have to be bad and then you have to be better. So committing fraud really is the best way to do that. I don't know whether it's significant, and people may not think very much of it, because is there any reason even to expect that a tiny change of 1 millimeter in the average blood pressure or a small decrement in the hemoglobin A1C is going to really make any significant difference in the patient's life, and it all is just a huge waste of time. And maybe you could just comment about what you think the results of this this so-called research might be.
Jeremy, am I on?
Yes, Dr. Kempen, please.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Orion completely. I think these issues are very difficult to look at, in as much as the fact that this is a program which has not been verified or validated. They're asking physicians to do things with their patients, to not inform the patients what they're doing, just to present it as their typical daily care, and to be doing it for personal gain seems to be a really big problem. I mean, you can look back to the Nuremberg laws that occurred after the Second World War, when the government stepped in and forced physicians to do a program which the government came up with, and really that's what this is we're talking about here. We would like to believe that that can't happen here now because it's America and not Nazi Germany, but as politics, as cost restraints come to bear upon society, things will happen, and if the money gets short, they will try to produce situations where money will not be wasted. We talked about death panels for care, and we know that certain care is restricted. Dr. Christman also mentioned the fact that the whole concept of prostate screening or mammography is now these are testing situations that have come under strong discussion as to be appropriate or inappropriate, which brings me back to the whole guideline concept that the guidelines, they come and they go. Radical mastectomy used to be the therapy of choice. I haven't seen one for 15 years now, and it's true of most guidelines that are around, so that the concept of medical reversal has emerged, in that if you examine the guidelines or the studies that were just produced 2 years ago, as much as 38% of them would be reversed upon subsequent review. Just to have one study point in one direction, that's really all it takes for these quality organizations to come up and create a mainstream push to go down that road, which can only be shown to be a false road subsequent to secondary investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kempen. And now we'll go to a question from the chat room. And the question is, what is the cutoff year for being grandfathered?
Well, the ABMS will never withdraw from the grandfathered certification, but it's important to recognize that board certification is only at this point in time an entry requirement for MOC, because it's going to be pushed that you have to be maintaining MOC in 2023, whether you're grandfathered or not, to be able to get your payments from the federal government, and the other insurance companies are only going to follow suit, so that you'll become stigmatized as a non-compliant physician, some kind of secondary idiot, I guess is one way to put it, to make you unworthy of receiving payment for your care, whereby physicians provide excellent care every day, and if tomorrow their certificate expires, that doesn't change their ability to practice medicine. And the state medical boards are there to validate through licensure your ability to practice medicine. And if they don't do it, the trial lawyers will certainly come after you. It's a corporate product, but in 2023, if you have a lifelong certificate, you will continue to have a lifelong certificate, but the boards will then advertise that you are not compliant with MOC, and should you try to be paid on the basis of being MOC compliant, it will not happen, and you may find yourself being tossed from various insurance programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll go to a question from Dr. Melinda Woofter, and I'll unmute Dr. Woofter here. Dr. Woofter, please go ahead.
Oh, I don't have a question. There must be a mistake.
Okay, no problem. All right,
Sorry.
Thank you. No worries. Thanks for joining us. Okay, now let's see. Okay, now we'll try another question from the chat room, and this one is it known how many physicians complied with CMS's PQRS requirements?
Specific to the MOC, as I said, in 2011, I asked the federal government to provide data through the Freedom of Information Act, and that only took about 4 months to get the information. It's the most recent year available. And again, I said 987 physicians actually applied for payment under the PQRS MOC, and a total of $1 million was paid out on that. So the number of physicians lining up is under 1,000. There was not an outpour. But the beauty of it is the government offered to pay people to sign up. People did not sign up. But if you don't complete MOC in 2015 and 16, they'll start to take your money away from you, and that will amount to billions of dollars, not just millions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to another question here from, and I'll unmute Dr. Powers. Dr. Powers, please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all your work on this. I have two questions. One is, in looking at other stakeholders who might be willing to have the same perspective on this as practicing physicians who want to put patient care first, individual patient care, are there any other stakeholders that might take the same approach? For instance, is this something that hospitals or insurers might be willing to be educated on and also stand against this? Or is that a pipe dream?
Well, I'd like to say that I think that there are only two stakeholders in this whole process, and I think those stakeholders are the doctor and the physician. And I'm saying the doctor and the patient, the physician and the patient. I don't see other stakeholders around, even though there are others who consider them to be stakeholders. But if you're talking about insurance companies, is your question whether or not they are in conformity with
Yeah, what I'm saying is would insurance companies or hospitals, if presented with some of this information, step back and say, you know what, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, it exposes us to liability because we're ensuring quality by doing this. There's no hard data on it, and it creates a distrust and a fracturing of our relationship with physicians, and maybe we don't want to support this at this time. Is that something that, in other words, if they start pushing back against MOC also, or hospitals start pushing back against MOC, would that be another avenue to get momentum going? I'm just asking that, what your general feel on that is. And then I have another issue I want to discuss also.
I think that's a good question, and I think there's a precedent for it already, actually with the government rather than the insurance companies. Now, the government had been requiring certification of the surgery centers that did bariatric surgery, and they decided that it didn't make any difference, so they dropped that requirement for certification. But what did the certifiers do? They got together and they said, no, this is still important. We still want to see this happen, and they're still trying to make a case that this is an important thing, that people need to be certified to make sure that there's quality in this particular institution. The government says, no, it's not necessary. Why? Because they decided that there was no value in it. So is it possible that the insurance companies might do the same thing? I hope so.
I think the issue is going to be, being as a corporate event, it's about follow the dollars. Insurance companies are always looking for reasons to not pay. The federal government is looking for reasons to not pay. And that's where this disincentive, the 1.5 or the 2% cutback, if you're not enrolled in MOC, has come from. And the hospitals, on the other hand, they may ultimately, as they continue to hire more and more physicians, they may recognize that the costs of them paying for physicians to do this, if we were to become unionized, et cetera, like other healthcare entities, when it becomes their burden, they might want to back off on it. But right now, you have to realize that maintaining certification, and the ABMS says it right straight out, you can find it in print, it's voluntary. Nobody has to do it. And so the hospitals and insurance companies will point at you and say, well, it's your obligation to go out there on Saturday and Sunday and take these courses and pay the money, and then it's your problem to deal with it. We're just going to demand it of you. I compare it to the ACLS certificates that we have to do, even though I'm a board-certified anesthesiologist who intubates and practices resuscitation every day in the operating room. They want me to have this little piece of paper. And in America, the politicians, bureaucrats are all tied up, all insane about having pieces of paper that they can lay down and demonstrate quality. And again, the JCAH is the board certifier for hospitals, and they're making situations happen where hospitals must have their physicians certified. Now, it's important to realize that as individuals, besides going through the political scene of our medical societies and going up through the legislators, we also have to attack the hospital medical staff and the executive committees to remove requirements for board certification to be on staff or to be included in an insurance program, because JCOH mandates whatever you mandate in your hospital. And as soon as you decide you need board certification, JCAH makes you have it. And these are the problems that we're faced in that the academic institutions, the largest corporate entities of hospitals, have physicians on board, and they all believe in certification because they don't want to take care of patients. They want to proliferate the curriculum vitae by writing MOC courses, simulation events, things like that, as opposed to treating patients. So in essence, the answer is going to be at any point in time, where's the money flowing and to whom? But the reality is the bureaucracy in healthcare is killing America because we can't afford to pay it. And I truly believe that as this national deficit becomes unsurvivable, we may find ourselves ultimately in 5 or 10 years dealing with fee-for-service payment where a physician sees a patient and there is no insurance company in the way. That's where it all started. For $5, you could go to a hospital for a day 40 years ago, but now it's $5,000 because we have this whole bureaucracy to pay for. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my take on things.
No, it answered it. Can I throw out one other idea also?
Certainly.
The concept that you brought up about how these guidelines are actually detrimental, they're fluid, they're changing. The human species isn't evolving every 2 years to different forms, but our guidelines certainly are changing. Are you familiar with the work that was done by a statistician named Ioannidis, who's now at Stanford, where he showed that the vast majority of published articles are probably false, and they're also looking into the fact that most priming articles can't be reproduced either, that we've moved away from taking data that's in the literature and actually checking it, and that our statistical analysis on a lot of what is, quote, published as peer-reviewed is probably flawed. And I think that's very powerful also, and I know that there's a lot of work going on in even journals like The Economist are publishing these articles about how the mere fact that we have come to rely on published journal articles is probably leading to bad medicine, bad outcomes, and bad practices in multiple arenas. I just didn't know if you were aware that that was out there now.
Well, I agree with you completely. I think I'm not familiar with your Dr. Ioannidis, but there have been repeated I'm an MD PhD. I'm familiar with statistics and science from the statistical end of things. And the problem we're facing right now with the electronic medical records, we're going after what Dr. Sessler at the Cleveland Clinic has called the big data. We collect our data from computers and we feed them in and we apply statistics, we sum it up, we divide it, and we come up with data. This retrospective analysis of data is only useful to find points of thought to prove in randomized controlled trials if it's true or not, because of the problem of bias. Now, if you can exclude bias in many situations, death and no death is pretty clear cut, it might be useful to look at the big data for very rare diseases where the only way to even look at them is through large data accumulations. However, the application of big data, and again, if I say one out of 1,000 or 2 out of 1,000 and call that 100% or a 50% difference, when you look at it, it's in reality, it's 1 out of 1,000 difference. And this is the problem with healthcare and medicine today, because no one has time to read all the studies that are out there. A colleague of mine in Columbus once did the extrapolation of the data and said that if you read 2 articles a day every day, at the end of the year, you're 82 centuries behind in your reading, because that's how many articles are coming out every day. And they're not all good articles. A lot of it is, well, junk science. But how are you able to know that? So we need to push forward to have all literature available for review in its complete format, freely available. That would improve healthcare. And we also need to stop believing in these big data studies that look for associations as opposed to randomized controlled trials that verify a reality. I like to say day follows night, night follows day. They're highly associated, but they don't cause each other. And we once believed the world was flat and that the earth was the center of the universe before we got rid of our biases and looked out and beyond. And so that is the core problem with medical authorship today, besides the fact that I think when you look at board certification and all these articles that are being paid by the ABMS and the boards to be published in their journals, etc., that the bias, and these are typically retrospective review articles or highly biased in their nature, published out there to sell their products. There's a lack of ethics in the corporate scheme of medicine. It's not the golden rule where you do unto others as you'd have done unto you. It's he with the gold rules. Thank you.
And I'd just like to add to that, I have personal direct experience with a highly prestigious medical institution where research was done that I know for a fact was completely false. So that doesn't surprise me, but I don't know to what extent it occurs in the medical literature, but I do know it occurs, and so it happens.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Powers, for your questions and comments there. Okay, we next go to a question from the chat room, and it reads as follows. I am a pediatrician, just passed the research exam 1 year ago, but have all this MOC stuff to do, 20 points left. What are current risks for simply not doing the remainder? I work for a hospital system in the Midwest with over 1,000 physicians. Seems hospital privileges require board recertification. I don't know about MOC requirements. Just worried about ramifications of not finishing the MOC at this point. Any comments on that question?
I would say everyone needs to look at their own personal situation, and you have to look at it hard. And you have to realize that if in your institution there is a concern for you being board certified, and in pediatrics, if you don't do the MOC, at some point your certificate will not exist. Again, I'll say board certified is past tense. Once you've done it, you are certified, and for life. Just because your board decides to limit it in a time fashion for their profit, does that make it any different than a lifelong certificate? In the eyes of bureaucrats, probably it does. But that doesn't mean that you need to stop fighting the MOC phenomenon, because it's in flux. It's only been in existence for less than for 14 years, really solidly in existence probably only for the last 10, and it's in flux. And now, because in 2000 all boards time limited their certificates, it's only in 2010 did it really become an issue. And I think people out there are losing their board certification status. And in 2011, the statistics showed that 25% were not certified. Will the rate go up? Will it remain the same? How will it change? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say. But given the fact that you see more and more physician resistance to this phenomenon, the emphasis is that if you don't believe in it, you need to go out and fight it now. You can continue collecting your MOC points, because the reality of it is I probably am compliant. I've always been listed as compliant with MOC, although I'm saying I'm not going to do it again, because I go out and do my CME, and it usually automatically accrues to sustain my ability to be MOC compliant. But at some point in time, if I don't take the test, which I'm not going to do, I won't be MOC compliant. At least by 2023, even the lifelong board certification will be not MOC compliant. And unless we fight this battle now, MOC will be the new board certification, and that will be throw you off the board or not based on your MOC compliance.
I think one of the avenues that should be considered to this particular question is to contact the people involved with the medical executive committee in the hospital. These are generally the people who set up these requirements, and they're not required to actually demand these things, but many times they do because they're pressured to do so. And sometimes these things can be stopped at that level, at the medical executive committee, and maybe AAPS can help you with that.
Also, I'd like to point out the fact that a lot of the people on the med exec are the older guys who may be lifelong certification holders. And if you point out to them where this is going and what it means with the PQRS MOC penalties, and with the fact that in 2023, it's going to come and get you too, they may be more inclined to realize that MOC is not what we need. We need lifelong learning, and we've all been doing that.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to go to a question from Dr. Martin Dubrovik. Dr. Dubrovik?
Hello. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just want to make sure. Thanks, Paul and Ken. Excellent. Of course, I know Paul, and this is one of the best presentations that he's presented on this topic. I really appreciate both Ken and Paul bringing this up. Question I have is, you talk about MOC, we talk about recertification, but isn't this really the same argument for board certification? When we finish a residency program or a fellowship program, we get a certificate that says that we have completed those programs. And those programs have multiple levels of regulation now with the American Council for Graduate Medical Education, the Residency Review Committee, and other organizations that are monitoring these groups. I really think that, although I also am not opposed per se to the concept of board certification, I really think that that is the gateway drug, in my opinion, with some of these programs in order to foster this whole idea of the industry. And I'm saying this as the founder of the National Board of Clinical Medicine, and I think that really, isn't it the best process to look at board certification as completely voluntary from the outset? And shouldn't we be questioning board certification, the process of initial board certification, just like we are with recertification and MOC?
Martin, I think you're onto something there. We have to look at the history of board certification, where it came from. It was a group of physicians. It started with eye doctors and ENT doctors who wanted to lift themselves above the crowd, to become like a country club phenomenon among the physicians, to espouse their excellence and superiority over others. And as long as we have this competition phenomenon in medicine, that's certainly something like the top doctors page in that Flight magazine. It makes everybody feel good about themselves. If you need to spend a few $1,000s to feel good about yourself, that's the one way to do it. The other thing to say is board eligible is a phenomenon that we're all familiar with. We used to have to go out and work for 2 years before we could take the oral boards, and the reality of that is that hospitals would hire you without a board certificate in your pocket because you couldn't get one until you worked for 2 years. Well, this is all kind of going by the wayside. The other problem is that in many specialties, for example in anesthesiology, you will not be able to graduate your residency program as of next year unless you pass part 3 of the written boards. So this whole thing is being indoctrinated and ingrained into the educational process by the academics who stand to proliferate by this. The reality is, board certification, as I said before, has its value as an outcome-based determinant for residency training, so that you can compare programs to each other based on the pass rates. The other thing is it gives validation to the individuals themselves that they might feel competent to practice on their own because they seem to have cut the mustard. The reality is the recertification and the MOC are things that are new, are being imposed upon physicians, have never been wanted by physicians, but are being dictated by corporate entities who are only standing to profit from it. And they're calling this a quality index, and I have never seen anything to validate any quality in these programs because they're continually morphing into something else, growing and becoming suppressive. And if you're in a specialty where you say, I took the test, it was no big deal, it was easy. Well, that's now. But if you look at the internal medicine, the degree of growth in the requirements and the severity. I mean, failing 28% of the people taking the recertification test, it's simply ridiculous. These are colleagues out there practicing on a daily basis. If you're in a specialty where everything seems easy, don't believe it will stay that way. That's all I can say.
Dr. Dubrovik, you're entirely correct. Board certification as well as recertification should be entirely voluntary. I have had mentors who were not board certified, and some of them were very competent. I have actually chosen to have surgery by a surgeon that I knew full well was not ever certified, and it was good surgery. It was well done. And so patients should not be deprived of that opportunity to choose doctors who are certified or not certified. It should be entirely voluntary. You're absolutely right.
And I also wanted to add here too is that some of the studies that have come out of the FSMB and the ABMS, they keep indicating that from the last year of your medical school, as you go forth, some of their data indicates that you become less competent. All that means is you get further from today's guideline and tomorrow it changed. I mean, a lot of medicine, particularly in surgical or in anesthesia, in surgical-based medicine, is not so much what you know, but do you know how to move your hands? Do you know how to anticipate problems, to deal with the acute changes in anatomy and physiology, which have not changed in the past millennium? I mean, and to say that you need to go and get recertified in these basic, the use of your hands to cure patients is simply ridiculous. And so this whole concept of discounting experience over a piece of paper that says you're certified based on a test that has been established by a corporate entity is a real problem with that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And just a few quick comments here. We do have some more questions that we'll get to in just a second here, but I have posted the link to the meeting evaluation in the chat room. For those that need to leave early, you can go ahead and take that and you'll get your CME certificate. Also, there have been questions about these slides. Yes, we will make the slides available. Following the conclusion of the event today, we will send everybody an email with a link to the slides and also including a link to the meeting evaluation. And then we will also have a video available of this, which should be ready by later tonight. And when it is ready, we will send you an email to let you know how to watch it. And with that, we'll move on to a few more questions here. There have been a couple questions about the status of the AAPS lawsuit against the ABMS. And I'll just make a quick comment about that. The ABMS is fighting very hard to have the venue moved to courts that are friendly to them in Illinois and Chicago. And we're fighting to keep it in New Jersey, which we believe is a more fair venue for this lawsuit. And we're hoping the judge is going to make a decision any day on that so the meat of the case can move forward. But that's where it's standing at the moment.
We're still tied up with procedural matters.
Yep. Now, all right, so let's go to Dr. Alexander, Dr. Dan Alexander. Please go ahead. Are you there, Dr. Alexander? Okay, well, let's try Dr. Michael Brown. Dr. Brown? Dr. Brown, you have a question? Okay, sorry about that. All right. Well, we have a few more questions in the chat room, and then we'll wrap up here. And sorry, Dr. Alexander, Dr. Brown, we couldn't seem to hear you there. If anyone else would like to raise their hand for a last question, we can probably take one or two more. All right, let's see. Now, here's a question from the chat room. How can you discourage subspecialty societies from going along with MOC since they will be losing all that revenue? Can these societies offer an alternative to the ABMS monopoly of certification industry for physicians?
Well, I would say that the first thing to do is to get into your national society and arrange to stand up in a meeting where the topic is being discussed. I've done this on several opportunities. I was at the Boston meeting 2 years ago where one of the chairmen of my board stood up and was instructing us on how we can best comply with MOC. And I asked basically 5 short questions about the problems with MOC, the fact that this is a money-making juggernaut, and the crowd turned mean. You have to realize physicians, working physicians by and large out there, if given the opportunity to think about this, they will see it for what it is. And if you can make that happen at a national meeting, then you will find that everyone is behind you. As I said, in Ohio, it was an easy task for Dr. Christman and I to band together to move 15,000 physicians to oppose this sort of thing, because it is clearly all about the money. And again, I think if you listen to this lecture, you've got the data you need. Anyone can contact me. I have all these things on files. I'll be happy to share the information, answer questions you have. But take it to the big meeting, stand up at the microphone, raise these questions, and let your colleagues carry the fight with you.
All right, thank you. And just another question here from the chat room, which has been discussed briefly already, but we'll ask it again in case anyone wants to expand on it. Can MOC be outlawed by state legislatures?
MOC is a little harder than MOL. MOL can be. MOC is a little bit more difficult because MOC really sort of transcends the states. But what we're trying to do is to create an environment where the state can say you cannot discriminate. Hospitals and insurers can't discriminate. We hope that that will work. We hope that states will introduce this legislation banning discrimination. I think that would accomplish what we want to accomplish.
I think Dr. Christman is correct on that. You have to realize that the American Board of Medical Specialties simply says this is all voluntary. Now, no law can stop you from becoming a Boy Scout or a campfire girl, except that maybe they might have sexual limitations on that. But that may also become a wash in the near future too, when we see football teams with boys and girls playing out on the field. If it's something you choose to do in America, the right to choice is what it's all about. The problem with the way these corporations are pushing it is they're taking away the choice. They're forcing it on physicians through regulatory capture by getting the hospital industry, the insurance industry, and the legislatures to demand it. And we have to stop this demanding of such a ridiculous country club association is probably the best way to look at it. Thank you.
Okay, let's see here. And thank you again to everybody for all the questions. We've gotten a lot of very good questions here. Now, here's another one from the chat room. I was unaware of the fact that CMS was now including MOC participation with PQRS and its impact on reimbursement. Please enlarge or comment on this issue.
Well, it's something that is being mandated in 2015. The penalties can incur if you don't participate, but then there's always the other components of the PQRS that you'll need to comply with, and this is just one of them. I think it's another example of the federal government trying to create situations to reduce payments to physicians based on arbitrary discrimination procedures. And the reality as I see it is if the government continues to go down the road of denying payments where they're paying 25 cents on the dollar now, pretty soon I think you're going to see physicians thumb their noses at Medicare and Medicaid even more than is currently happening, and it will then shift to the hospital industry to absorb all this through their employed physician programs. And again, if they start cutting the payments to the physicians who are working for the hospitals, this may be the only real opportunity to get the hospital industry on our side. And it may be finally coming to a point where physicians may choose to become unionized under these hospital employed situations and demand that MOC be paid like pilots get paid to fly in the simulators to sustain their licensure for the major airlines. You know, the problem right now is it's all on you as a physician working in your office to do all this stuff, and you know you're just trying to make your living and treat patients. But when this flow of money starts to hurt other components in the industry, then they're going to raise their head and fall on our sides. But the reality is, with the expansion of the deficit and the cost in medicine through the overwhelming bureaucracy that's being pushed upon us, that is the only thing that's going to lead to the demise of medicine, and it probably will lead to the demise of medicine.
Okay, thank you. Here's any chance that we can tie conflict of interest penalties with any regulatory push for MOC. For example, no money can flow to any organization or sub-organization of any body that oversees MOC.
Well, that would be a question for Dr. Andrew Shafley, and he's not here. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really say, but I can say there are severe conflict of interest, and I would urge everyone in reading their journals when you see these MOC articles written with no conflict of interest to declare where it clearly is there, take issue with the editors, raise the question with them. I think we need, as the next objective, is to push for the specialty journals to at least require these corporate entities to declare that they do have conflicts of interest, because this apparently is still running under the radar in the view of most, certainly the majority of academic physicians and institutions.
Okay, thank you. And we'll pass that question along to Andrew Schlafly to see if he has any more to say about that. And let's see here. There's one of the listeners wants to know if there's anyone in the audience here who's afraid of retaliation by ABIM if they go against MOC. And you know, if you have a response to that, please just send it in the chat room and we'll read that. Okay, and I think we're going to need to wrap this up. Let's see, I think we can take maybe 2 more questions from the chat room here. One is that ARNPs are now standing by to take over the reins of medical care without any form of specialty certification. How do you see them affecting this process? Insurance providers are glad to let them take care of patients at a reduced rate. Any comments on that?
I see this as the crux of the problem, is that we're trying to make physicians do more and more and more and more. We're pointing our fingers at physicians as being the source of problems in healthcare, when in reality, it's the government that is causing these problems with their overwhelming bureaucracy. And the issue is healthcare is too expensive. Let's find the cheapest provider, even though they may not have the education they need to do whatever they're doing. We're going to let them go ahead and do it because they're cheaper. We are dumbing down medicine because we want to pay less for it. And these are the issues that are so conflagratory in my mind about the MOC, is that we keep pushing doctors harder and harder. We're making them too expensive because we have to take time off, spend money, waste time to do these things. We're pricing ourselves out of the market with the imposition of this bureaucracy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take one more here, and then I think we'll need to wrap it up. Why are non-ABMS specialty boards discriminated against by the certification industrial complex?
Well, it's the money, honey. They want the money, and they have the copyright on the term board certified, and they have political powerhouses in various states to push. I mean, there's the American Board of Physician Specialists that has been out there for over 60 years, certifying, I believe, in 14 different specialties, but they have trouble running up against the ABMS. The only reason the DOs are doing so well is because they're not allopathic physicians, and somehow they've got their own specialty group there, and they've been able to formulate their own educational programs and their own certification programs. But the real reason is they're following the guidelines of the ABMS without being in direct competition to them.
All right, thank you. And just to wrap up here, I'll read a last comment from the chat room. And this listener says that just thank you for the excellent presentation and for all the work you've done. I look forward to sharing this information with my colleagues and fighting the good fight to continue to provide excellent, individualized, unobstructed care to my patients. And thank you, Doctor, for that comment. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Christman and Dr. Kempen for your hard work on this webinar today and for all the great information you disseminated. And a reminder that following after we wrap this up, you'll get an email within about 15 minutes with a link to the evaluation and also a link to the slides. And then later today, when we have the video ready, we'll send you the link. And please feel free to share that with your colleagues as far and wide as possible. So with that, I'll just ask the doctors, Dr. Christman and Dr. Kempen, if you have any last comments to wrap
I'd like
things
to
up.
thank everyone for participating, and it's a battle for everyone to carry into the fields, and you will be surprised when you discuss this with colleagues how understanding they will be, and a little bit of pressure goes a long way in forming political movement in your own home state. Thank you all very much.
And I also want to thank you for attending, and I want to remind you that this is really an issue that has to do with ethics, and unfortunately we have doctors amongst us who have made choices that we cannot and should not go along with, and we need to stop this whole process now before it gets worse than what it is.
All right. Thank you again, everyone. And there was a huge interest in this today. It was very well attended. We had over 100 physicians on this webinar. And so I think we'll have to do this again in the very near future. But with that, we'll wrap it up and say good evening to you. Goodbye.